The Ku Klux Klan is a white supremacist hate group that has a long history of violence and intimidation. Since prisons are complex environments, the presence of white supremacists within the system raises questions about their activities, influence, and impact on other inmates. So what happens to KKK members after all is said and done and fate lands them behind bars? We'll explore together what happens, the actions and behaviors of the KKK members in prison, bringing to the spotlight their ideologies, interactions, and the punitive actions taken against them. Larry Webster. Incarceration can be a particularly challenging experience for individuals affiliated with white supremacist hate groups such as the Ku Klux Klan. While prison environments are inherently harsh and often dangerous, the dangers these individuals face are amplified due to their extremist beliefs and affiliation with a hate group. They often face risks from both fellow inmates and potential enemies outside of prison. It's a precarious situation where they may become both culprits and victims simultaneously. The case of Larry Webster, who was awarded damages after being assaulted by fellow black inmates, highlights the precarious situation such individuals can find themselves in while behind bars. The safety of KKK members in prison is a significant concern. Their association with a hate group makes them targets for violence from both fellow inmates and external enemies seeking retribution. On one hand, they may be targeted by other prisoners who see them as symbols of hate and oppression. On the other hand, enemies of the KKK may view incarcerated members as vulnerable and seek to harm them as a form of revenge. In Larry Webster's case, the decision to place him with black inmates proved disastrous. The overcrowded cell and financial constraints prevented prison management from isolating him. On July 19, 2000, a significant legal outcome unfolded in Houston, Texas. A federal jury awarded damages totaling $55,000 to Larry Webster, a member of the Ku Klux Klan, who had been subjected to a brutal assault by fellow black inmates while sharing a cell. Despite Webster's visible Klan tattoos, he was placed with these prisoners because the cell was overcrowded and the prison management couldn't afford to put him in an isolated cell. Little did they know that the hunter would become the hunted. Unfortunately, when authorities placed Webster in the cell, the decision unwittingly exposed him to grave danger. Presented court records detailed how Webster suffered a kick to the face and an elbow injury, necessitating treatment at a hospital emergency room. The black inmates preemptively reacted to the potential threat posed by Webster, driven by the pervasive belief of the violent tendencies of KKK members, particularly towards black individuals. This perception likely fueled their actions before Webster even had a chance to make a move. The verdict rendered by the jury placed the weight of responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the county sheriff's Major Eric Nevelow and classification sergeant Leslie Hobbs. They were both supposed to be responsible for whatever happens in the prison, and so were held accountable for the damages caused to Webster due to their negligent treatment of him, taking into account his clear vulnerability stemming from his white supremacist affiliations. They had clearly failed to provide adequate protection, despite being aware of the potential risks associated with his beliefs. Remarkably, throughout the 4-day civil trial, Webster displayed commendable legal skills as he cooperated and represented himself. This unusual proficiency for a KKK member impressed even the defending attorney Dan Glowacki, who admitted it was the first case he had lost in his 17 years of practice. Edgar Ray Killen, a former Ku Klux Klan member and orchestrator of the killings of 3 civil rights workers in 1964, maintained his defiant and racist views until his death in January 2018 at the age of 92. Killen's prison record, obtained through a public records request by the Southern Poverty Law Center, revealed numerous disciplinary write-ups during his time in the Mississippi State Penitentiary. Killen, known for his segregationist beliefs and recruitment efforts for the Klan, played a role in the murders of Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney during the Freedom Summer in Mississippi. He ordered the killings to hinder the civil rights movement and discourage other activists from coming to the area. The victims' bodies were discovered after 44 days, leading to the infamous Mississippi burning investigation and subsequent trials. Despite being free for 4 decades after the murders, Killen lived a life of relative impunity, even publicly expressing his racist views. In 2005, Mississippi prosecutors finally brought charges against him, resulting in a conviction on 3 counts of manslaughter and 3 consecutive 20-year prison sentences. Killen's adjustment to prison life at the age of 80 proved challenging as he clashed with prison officials and repeatedly violated rules. When Killen, who was 80 years old at the time, went to prison, it was tough for him to adjust to not being in control like he had always been. As a staunch supporter of segregation, being surrounded by mostly black inmates, about 72%, added to his stress. At the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility in Pearl, and later at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman, Killen had frequent conflicts with prison prison officials right from the beginning. One incident occurred when Killen got into a heated argument with a corrections officer at the Central Mississippi facility. He insulted her with offensive language, and when asked to sign a report about the incident, he refused, saying he wouldn't speak without his lawyer present. This refusal to cooperate with disciplinary reports happened multiple times during his time in prison. Killen faced consequences for his behavior as well. He lost access to the inmate canteen for 30 days as a punishment for hiding tobacco products in the cushion of his wheelchair, which he used to move around the prison. This was one of at least 3 times he received such a punishment for breaking the rules or defying authorities. He struggled to adapt to a loss of control and a diverse prison environment. Then he began shouting at corrections officer Brenda Johnson while at the penitentiary, and it cost him 15 days of telephone privileges. Correction officer Johnson also noted a constant problem with Killen when he refused to put on a state-issued shirt before going to the inmate dining area. That cost him another 15 days of phone privileges. And again, Killen refused to sign the rule violation report. By April 2013, Killen had lost all privileges, use of the canteen, phone, and any visitation for 15 days for another confrontation with Johnson, during which he yelled abusive words at her. He didn't mind and didn't care and wasn't going to stop. It seemed the correctional officer was changed because in another confrontation with a different officer, Killen told the corrections officer he was going to beat her and repeatedly used offensive language toward her. That resulted in another 30-day loss of all privileges. Killen's time in prison was marked by multiple incidents of confrontations with prison officials, offensive language, and refusal to comply with rules and disciplinary reports. These incidents led to various punishments, including the loss of privileges for extended periods. In one of the tense moments at the prison, Killen got into a heated argument with a corrections officer and used offensive and racist words toward her. He even tried to stop her from leaving his cell by using his wheelchair and went as far as throwing coffee at her. The situation got worse, and the officer had to use chemical spray to protect herself, but Killen refused any medical help afterward. During his time in prison, Killen sought attention from the media, claiming he was a political prisoner, not a criminal. He showed no remorse for his actions and didn't take responsibility for the harm he caused. Eventually, his life in prison ended quietly when he was found unresponsive during a routine check. His funeral arrangements were kept private, and very few people who didn't even know him posted messages in his online condolence book. He was laid to rest in a family plot near the very site where he had committed the terrible acts that defined his dark legacy. Throughout his time in the Mississippi State Prison from 2009 until his death at 92, Killen received a total of 17 disciplinary write-ups. These stories paint a picture of an aging man who remained stubbornly racist until the end of his life at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman. Thomas Jordan Driver. In prisons, there are also guards who are KKK members, and if that's the case, what happens to them? What do they do? 2 state prison guards and a former co-worker, identified as members of the KKK, who were charged with conspiracy to murder in Florida. Thomas Jordan Driver, alongside associates David Elliott Moran and Charles Thomas Newcomb, plotted to kill a former black inmate over a fight that occurred in a Northeast Florida prison. The plot was a result of retaliation for a fight between Driver and the inmate, where Driver claimed the inmate bit him, potentially exposing him to AIDS and hepatitis. Back in 2013, on a hot and sticky August day, something happened in a reception and medical center's prison dorm room in Florida, about an hour south of the Georgia state line. The reception and medical center is where new inmates are processed and also serves as a prison hospital. One of the inmates, Williams, was a quiet and tall individual weighing over 200 pounds. He also suffered from severe anxiety and depression, and according to records, he was serving a 1-year sentence for assaulting a police officer. Williams had agreed to enter a plea of no contest in return for a reduced sentence and an assessment of his mental health, followed by treatment under county supervision. The incident that led to their confrontation happened when Williams lost his identification badge, which was considered a prison rule violation. Williams told the other man, Driver, to stop blowing smoke at him, and he promised to report him later. However, Driver ignored his request and blew more smoke at Williams. Irritated, Williams told him to stop again. When Driver continued to disregard his pleas, Williams reacted by attacking him. They ended up wrestling on the ground, and during the struggle, Williams bit Driver. A group of guards intervened and brutally beat Williams, causing him serious injuries that required hospitalization, according to his mother and lawyer. As a result of the bite, Driver had to undergo a series of tests for HIV and hepatitis C as a precautionary measure. Fortunately, All the tests came back negative, but the experience enraged him, and he sought revenge. The FBI assisted, however, in foiling the plot by using a confidential informant who convinced the suspects that he would carry out the murder. So they discussed the situation and contemplated various approaches. They mentioned the possibility of intercepting the individual discreetly when he was alone if they saw him walking down his home. Their conversations revolved around using syringes with insulin to incapacitate him, should they need to apprehend him for questioning. Alternatively, they considered the idea of carrying a 9mm handgun, before Charles suggested using a picture as an idea of making him a gunner in a brutal way. Surveillance operations were initiated, focusing on the target's home. Conversations about the plot were captured through secret recordings, providing incriminating evidence against the three defendants. Driver reportedly said in a secretly recorded phone call, "If it was me personally and I had another chance at him, I'd stomp his larynx closed. And after, I kicked his teeth out so he wouldn't bite nobody ever again." The target, William, unaware of their plans, was being released from prison and assumed it was connected to the prior prison fight he had with the prison. Guards after the FBI informed him of the plot, but left him out of the details. But he was prepared and ready for the confrontation of being loaded with insulin from syringes and left face down in a river next to a fishing pole to make it look like an accident. He probably shuddered at the plan of being shot and chopped up like a wood, as opposed to the first choice of being stomped in the throat and his teeth kicked out. But the informant, whose name was Joseph Moore, staged a photograph of a murder scene and showed it to the suspects. All three men expressed their satisfaction, believing their intended victim had met a gruesome end. However, they were caught. Driver and Moran, who were corrections officers, were taken back into the prison from where they planned the murder to face a full jail term with the gracious reward of being fired from their positions. Newcomb, who had a history of impersonating a police officer and was out on bail for unrelated charges, later joined them behind bars. Tommy Terrence. Believe it or not, KKK members are human beings too, and some of them strongly believed in a particular ideology at one point, but over time some of them changed their beliefs. It's possible that for some KKK members, the need to believe in something led them to join the KKK, and they remained loyal as long as those beliefs lasted. One such example is Tommy Terrence, who experienced this in the early 1960s. He was once known as the most dangerous man in Mississippi. As a teenager, he had a difficult relationship with his father, which led him to seek role models elsewhere. Unfortunately, he found himself looking up to his white supremacist neighbor instead. He was consumed by intense hatred towards blacks, Jews, and communists, which led him to become an extremist, driven by his beliefs. After getting kicked out of college, he went underground and eventually joined the White Knights, a highly violent faction of the Ku Klux Klan. Tommy's skills as a sharpshooter and explosives expert made him a ruthless and efficient terrorist. However, fate had a different plan for Tommy. As a member of the White Knights, Terrence took part in about 30 bombings of synagogues, churches, and homes. However, he was eventually caught by the FBI in a sting operation in Meridian. In 1968, while attempting to bomb the home of a Jewish businessman, he and a friend were caught in a fierce gun battle with law enforcement. Tragically, Tommy's friend lost his life, and Tommy himself sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Rushed to the hospital, his chances of survival seemed slim, but against all odds, Tommy recovered. Once he was well enough, Tommy faced trial and received a sentence of 30 years in prison. Life behind bars was far from easy, and Tommy described it as living in a sewer. However, it was during these challenging months that a change began to take place within him. His time in prison forced him to confront his beliefs and examine the foundations of his hatred, something unusual for most KKK inmates. Although after 6 months in prison, he escaped with 2 other inmates to continue his terrorist activities. But they were caught in a gunfight with the authorities, and 1 inmate was killed. If it wasn't for him relieving me from watch duty, he would have died. Now back in prison, he was confined to a tiny maximum security cell with his prison sentence extended by 5 years and only 2 showers a week. In his solitary cell, Tommy's reading material evolved from extremist propaganda to philosophy and eventually some spiritual materials. Prison guards and inmates couldn't help but notice the change in him. The passion of his resentment had been shifted to a fervent yearning for spiritual enlightenment. Tommy became a model prisoner, known for his newfound faith and leadership among the inmates. For 7 long years, Tommy was in prison, and even though people around him noticed a change, they weren't sure what caused it. But then, things took an unexpected turn. Tommy got a chance to attend a seminar, but getting released from prison for that was tough due to lots of paperwork and bureaucracy. Thankfully, a call to Governor Cliff Finch got it approved, and after 7 years, Tommy was finally going to be free. Then, Tommy's friend Fred came in all excited with a note from Billy Graham, the famous preacher. Billy wanted them to talk to a new Christian, Eldridge Cleaver, who used to be part of the Black Panther movement and had a wild past. Eldridge had changed after some time in jail, and Chuck had written him a letter of encouragement before, which he hadn't responded to until then. They arranged a meeting with Eldridge Eldridge and also planned a dinner with some inmates. But there was a catch. Tommy used to be a Klansman and he really hated everything Eldridge represented, so Chuck introduced them, and at first it was tense. But then Eldridge surprised everyone by offering his hand and acknowledging that they both had a lot to live down. During the dinner, something incredible happened. All the inmates shared their stories, and Eldridge observed Tommy closely, trying to see if his transformation was real. Eldridge's wife, Maxine, who wasn't a believer, was amazed by what she saw and said that if this was craziness, the whole world should be crazy like this. It was a remarkable evening. Despite their differences and backgrounds, they came together, prayed, cried, and embraced each other. They became like a family bonded by their shared faith, even though society might think they should be enemies. Terrence later wrote a book called The Conversion of a Klansman and also co-wrote He's My Brother together with John Perkins, an African-American evangelical leader. George Mulvaney. In something that similarly happened to Tommy Terrence, George Mulvaney's life took a turbulent turn during his teenage years, marked by recklessness, fights, and a disdain for school. Despite his love for the outdoors, he dropped out of Murrah High School, convinced that his wild and reckless lifestyle would lead to a disastrous end. Little did he know that his life was about to take a surprising and unlikely turn. His journey unfolded in a way that even he couldn't have predicted. At the age of 19, he made a very unsettling decision to join and lead a Ku Klux Klan unit on his Navy ship. He admitted that it was an emotional and irrational choice influenced by a friend of a friend. I was from a good background, a good home. I never remember being around racist talk or people like that growing up. Joining the Klan, getting involved in a conspiracy to overthrow a country. It doesn't make sense. It's something I've been trying to understand for years, something I'm still trying to understand. Following his Navy experience, he fell in with the KKK planning to invade Dominica and replace the government with a right-wing regime. Despite being naive and patriotic, he got involved in this adventure, oblivious to some of the group's ulterior motives, including a cocaine smuggling ring. However, the FBI intervened and foiled the plan by destabilizing the Dominican invasion before it could materialize. This led to George's arrest and sentencing to 4 years in prison. In the Atlanta penitentiary, he had a profound experience that started him on the path of change. Writing letters for fellow prisoners opened his eyes to the fact that people, regardless of their backgrounds, shared common emotions and humanity. Prison became a turning point for George. He made a conscious decision to use his time wisely and to emerge from incarceration as a better person. Determined to break free from his criminal past, he vowed to avoid any further involvement in illegal activities. In his testament of his experience, George disclosed that during his time in prison, he found himself in a unique and eye-opening situation. He was connecting with black convicts, including murderers, bank robbers, drug dealers, and kidnappers, who opened up to him, sharing their personal feelings. While they became my companions and peers, he was determined not to be swayed by their actions or choices. These were individuals considered hard-case convicts, seeking an outlet for their emotions. This experience provided him with a different perspective and helped him see the humanity and goodness in them, despite their past mistakes. His decisions during his prison stay had a profound impact on the trajectory of his future, as he often described his time in prison as a wonderfully terrible experience that he would never want to relive, yet it had become one of the most valuable chapters of his life. Realizing the consequences of his past irrational and reckless decisions, he made a pivotal decision on his first day in federal prison in Tallahassee, Florida. He was to face a 4-year sentence, but without prior knowledge of what to expect, he questioned how he would spend the next 4 years and whether he wanted to spend his entire life behind bars. George committed to holding his head high and persevering through this challenging time. Months spent in his cell in Atlanta's penitentiary allowed for intense self-reflection. He scrutinized the path that had led him there, understanding that his involvement with the Klan had been a grievous mistake. He recognized the importance of distancing himself from such influences and vowed to pursue higher education upon his release, driven by the desire to become something more than a criminal. He kept a positive mental attitude even when it was a challenge, and that helped him embrace growth into a better person. This period of introspection and self-improvement during his time in prison laid the groundwork for his transformation. When I walked out the front door of the prison and they're going to take me to the airport, the feeling of being free was unbelievable. And when I'm walking out that door, literally, I remember in this plane today, I was muttering cups up. By the time he was out, he did pursue a college education and with a newfound determination to become anything but a criminal. Indeed, reflecting on his life and the environmental impact he witnessed materialized in his decision to pursue a career in environmental studies. This passion led him to play a crucial role in the cleanup efforts of the BP oil spill jail along the Gulf Coast in 2010. George also found a way to give back to the incarcerated community. He became a strong supporter of Big House Books, an organization that provides reading materials to prisoners, drawing from his own experience of being deprived of reading materials during his time in the hole. The title of his book, Cups Up, holds a significant meaning for him as it symbolizes a powerful and life-changing moment during his first day in prison, where he had an internal dialogue about how he ended up there and how he would change his life for the better. The decision to write his book was prompted by his experiences during the BP crisis, when many people questioned how he had transformed from his troubled past to a leader in a crisis response effort. His life in prison led to a transformation that shaped the course of his future forever, and he now shares his story to help others find hope and strength in their own journeys. The KKK has declined significantly from over 5 million members to a few thousand within the United States. But the pertinent question remains, when will hate crimes end? If you want to dive deeper into related videos, click on the screen cards for more intriguing videos. Sources: